In this video, I'm going to show you how to get a free house, otherwise termed as an all money out deal. Let's get into the analysis. Welcome to this video on a HMO deal analysis on a property which we've just gone through on a walkthrough on a previous video. So if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, go back and click on it and then come back and we'll go through the full deal analysis. Before we start, I'll give you a brief background about this property that we're going to go through today. I got it in 2021 and it was during COVID time, so people were a little bit scared coming to the market, didn't know what was going to happen. So that's why that when we get to the purchase price, you might be quite shocked at how much we secured this property for. But don't worry, because there's still property deals like this available. And I actually secured this property at what's known as informal tender, and it's a brown envelope job where you basically put your best and final offers into a brown envelope, all sealed. You drop it off to the estate agents, and on this occasion, they opened all the envelopes up at 12 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and the best offer basically won that deal. But because I get obsessed in buying properties, I actually staked out the estate agency. A little bit sad, but I wanted to make sure that nobody else was entering into that estate agent's building. And I have got footage of this actually happening. And the reason behind this was that I kept ringing up the estate agent on the Friday saying, has any offers been placed yet for this property? They kept saying no. So I went down earlier, about 2 hours earlier, and just watched the estate agency for anyone walking in and dropping off those envelopes. And nobody did, which meant that I was able to secure this property for a purchase price of £50,000. So I'm stood outside the estate agents. I've just placed my offer, 50,000, and I'm just kind of waiting to see now what happening behind this telephone box, and the estate agents is there on the corner. And I know that if you're in London, £50,000 you can't buy a garage, I get it, but we don't invest there, we invest all across the north in Yorkshire, and we are opening up a James Property Club which does help investors secure these types of deals. And this property was a Buy Refurbish Refinance deal, hence why I've split this board into the buying costs, the refurbishment costs, and then the refinancing costs, and what happens here in terms of the end value. And then later on in this video, we are going to go through the rental income figures and the expenses to get to that net pre-tax profit. So we have our purchase price, and now we need to calculate the stamp duty land tax, or SDLT. Now, just to make you aware that this only applies to England and Northern Ireland. If you are buying property in Scotland or in Wales, there will be different taxes that apply in terms of the rates. So for this, we've got an additional stamp duty charge of 3%, which is a surcharge added to the residential rates, the normal rates of stamp duty, if you're an investor or if you're buying a second home. But if you are a home mover or if you're a first-time buyer, again, you may qualify for different rates. For example, if you're a first-time buyer, there's no stamp duty to pay up to £425,000 at the time of recording, because they're always changing it. And if you're just moving home, you're not an investor, you have a stamp duty relief of up to £250,000. But as we're investors, we have a 3% surcharge on top of all of that, which means that 3% of our purchase price of £50,000 is £1,500. Then we have our solicitors at £1,500. Now this does vary depending on if you're buying it in a limited company or on your personal name, there's different rates, but that's approximately the average of what you'll be paying for your solicitors. We then move on to the refurb costs. Now, the refurb costs for this property, I'll tell you before I go into the detail, was £30,000, and it was a large-scale refurbishment. But remember, I bought this back in 2021. Well, if you've been following the Instagram, the social media for a while, you know that I did quite a lot of the work ourselves, which meant that I was able to cut down a lot of the labour costs. But we did do a full-scale back-to-brick refurb with 2 new en-suites, a full kitchen and bathroom, all the flooring, paintwork, bit of damp-proof course, windows and doors. Everything was pretty much done in that property apart from the roof, and that's what we ended up coming in at £30,000. So if we sum it up, this brings our total spend, or our total investment at this point, to £83,000, which includes the purchase price, solicitors, stamp duty, and the refurb. And then once you've now finished and got to this stage, your property is looking immaculate with top spec finishes for your tenants to move in, or guests if it's an Airbnb. We then have to send out a surveyor to our property. So we do this by contacting a lender or a mortgage broker or your high street bank, whichever route you want to go down, and they will send out their surveyor to give you their new valuation on that property. Now, I have a little story about this, because the first valuer who came out downvalued my property massively. He actually valued it at £95,000, which was ridiculous because I knew confidently that it wasn't worth that. It was worth way more, at least a minimum of £125,000. based on my research of sold house price comparables, where I look at properties sold recently, ideally within 3 to 6 months, within a quarter-mile radius of my property, which was the same terraced property, and I knew I was getting figures of 125,000. I think the surveyor just woke up on the wrong side of the bed that morning. So what happens after that when you get a down valuation? I will go into make a separate video on this completely, so we can go through the steps of down valuation. But what I did for this purpose was I contacted my mortgage broker, who got me a second opinion, a second lender, and essentially a new surveyor to come out to that property 1 week later. And instead of valuing it at 95, he valued it at £135,000. Which was a huge difference, but that meant I could now take out 75% loan to value of this amount. And just remember that I was more prepared for this time when the valuer came around, because I had a valuation pack ready, which I handed to him with all of my evidence. And I think that did persuade him a little bit. And remember, if you are a James Property University student, you will be able to get the valuation pack and all of the deal analysis tools inside the resource library. Having said that, I then managed to pull out 75% of this amount, which is £101,250. Now, something to mention at this point is I did buy this property with cash, but you didn't have to. You could use bridging finance, which would only require a 25% deposit. Or if you're going to go for a buy-to-let property, not this property because this required quite a large-scale refurbishment. If you're just looking to buy a buy-to-let, vanilla buy-to-let, turnkey investment that's ready to go, you can use a buy-to-let mortgage, again, only requiring a 25% deposit of the purchase price. As we know, we do have refinancing costs when we revalue our new properties, when we're pulling money out. Those refinancing costs are split across solicitors, because we need conveyancing again to make sure all the transactions are happening correctly. We need a mortgage broker, and we will likely need a valuation fee as well, which basically covers the costs of the surveyor to come out and value your property. Which in my case, all in all, was £1,500 again for solicitors, £500 for a broker, and £500 for a valuation fee, bringing the total to £2,000 in refinancing costs. So if you're new to the Buy Refurbish Refinance strategy, let me explain what happens next. So my property was now valued at £135,000. I'd increased it by £52,000, right? That's the equity gain that I've made from buying it at 50 and doing all the refurb. It's now valued at 135. I then went to the bank. They offered me 75% of this amount, which is £101,250. That money literally gets sent from the bank, from the lender, into my bank account. Tax-free, because it's a loan, it's a mortgage. You then have to understand how to get to the cash in the bank left. To do that, have you got any loans that you need to repay back? I mentioned earlier I bought this cash, so I didn't have any loans. Other loans might be, you have to pay the original bridging finance company back, the original mortgage company back. That would then need to be deducted to then be left with your cash in the bank. As I bought this cash, I didn't have any loans, so I'm still at 101,250 in my bank, but I did have refinance costs of £2,000. So left in my bank account was £99,250, tax-free. So that's the amount now that I've got left in my bank account to go and invest into another property to recycle, which I did. I went and bought an Airbnb property. And then from the refinance of the Airbnb, I then bought the house next door to this house that we're discussing now. That's for another video. So that's how you recycle cash. But how much money have we left in the deal? What's the cash left in the deal? So to find out that figure, we now need to look at how much money we extracted from our deal that we pulled out, which was this amount, £101,250. And then we need to minus all of our costs involved. So the costs were £83,000 minus our refinance costs of £2,000, which meant that we'd actually pulled out all of the money in that deal plus an extra £16,250. So just to recap on how we got this number here, 16,250, I just want to make sure that we're all aware that we had our £101,250 that we pulled out. We then minus our refinancing costs of £2,000 and all other costs involved, which was our total spend of £83,000. So 83 plus 2 is 85,000, and because our 101,250 is more than that amount, leaves us with a positive number, which is this plus £16,250. And to now calculate the percentage of the cash that we've recycled, what we need to look at here is the cash that we've got left in the bank, which is 99,250. We need to divide that by the total spend of 83,000 and then times that by 100 to get our percentage, which is 120% of the cash recycled. Which means we've managed to pull out 100% of our money that we've invested. It's an all money out deal. And we've got an extra 20% on top of that, which is this figure here, the £16,250. And I do want to make aware here that not all of these deals will look as good as this. In fact, it's probably my best one yet in my portfolio. So don't be too disheartened if you are leaving money in the deal. Now let's discuss the rental income figures on this property. So with the rental income, first of all, I've split this board into the number of tenants that we're going to have in this property, because remember, it's a HMO. Then we're going to look at the weekly rent. For some unknown reason, when we talk about HMOs, we always refer to the weekly rent. That's what gets advertised on Rightmove typically. So for example, £135 a week per person, including bills, is the way that we would advertise. The contract length is going to be a 52-week contract. It's a full year. And then this will give us our gross annual rental income and then our gross monthly rental income. The gross amount is obviously not taking into consideration the expenses, which we will get onto later on. Now, up until a year ago, this property was technically a buy-to-let because it was rented out to 2 students, not 3. That's because in my area, I'm in an Article 4, which means I have to apply to the council to get change of use into a HMO, which is then classed as 3 or more unrelated people living in that property. That is the definition of a HMO. Below that amount, you can rent out to 2 people on a weekly rate. And before that, the weekly rent was still £135 a week. There was 2 people living there, so that was £1,170 a month from this property. And the reason why I'm telling you all of this, because I've now been successful with my planning application, is just how much drastically and significantly this changes in terms of being more profitable just by adding in that extra bedroom to class it as a HMO. And here's what that looks like. So if we take a property, this exact property, by the way, in my area, would rent to a family for £650 a month on a buy-to-let. What we like to do is we like to convert those into house shares, into HMOs, house of multiple occupation, and we split the house into separate units, separate rooms. And we said here £135 a week, which is £585 a month, the equivalent of. So if you've got 3 students at 585, you can see a month, all bills included, which we'll get onto on the expenses, you can see how much of a big difference this will make to your profitability. So we've got now, after planning permission being approved, 3 tenants, 3 students living in that house. The weekly rent we said was £135 a week, including bills. And the contract length we mentioned was on a 52-week contract. So to calculate our gross annual rental income on this deal, we've got 3 tenants. We're going to times that by £135 a week, so 3 times 135, times that by a 52-week contract, which gives us a gross annual of £21,060 a year. Divide that number by 12, which gets us to £1,755 a month. And if you remember that this property used to be a 2-bed, as I mentioned previously, and that number used to be £1,170 a month. And as you can see, I've increased that by £585 a month just by adding in that extra tenant. Now let's take a look at the expenses associated with this HMO property. So now we're on to the expenses, and when you're running a rental business, a buy-to-let or a HMO business, these are the typical expenses that will continually crop up. And it's important to know what these are and how much you're going to be paying, because that will obviously get you to your net figure. Now, the first cost is the management fee, the letting agent's fee, who charge 11% plus VAT of the gross monthly rent that we are making. And for that, if you remember, we are making £1,755 a month in rent. So they are going to charge us a fee of that amount. So I will actually just put here 1755, just so we've got that. And 11% of this amount, plus the VAT on top of that is going to be £232. And I just want to make you aware that this management has probably been one of the best decisions that we've made, because it's allowed us to get our time back, because of a lot of work involved in managing tenants, from tenant communication, referencing, setting out contracts. The list is quite endless and it's not a very enjoyable part of property. So to get our time back for this 11% means that we can focus on buying more properties. Then it's the repairs. Again, what you should do is always allow for 10% ideally of the monthly figure that you're making, the gross monthly figure. That allows you then, if the boiler, you're not always going to spend 10% every month, but if the boiler breaks in the 11th month, for example, at least you've been saving up for that amount. So 10% of this 1755 rounded up is £176 a month. Remember, these are all monthly figures. Next is the gas electric. As you know, a HMO, you will typically be covering the tenant's bills. Now, we know that energy prices have gone up, but I actually fixed in with a company, Octopus, for a fixed term, who are giving me a good deal so far. And that is coming in at £200 a month. Now, obviously, once that fixed term ends, it might go up, but I'm giving you the real-time figures right now. Then we move on to the water, which is £30 a month. Wi-Fi, we're paying for super fast internet broadband. It is a little bit pricey, but it's £54 a month, and at least it's offering a good service. If you shop around, you might be able to get a little bit cheaper, but in my area, it is quite pricey. TV license is £13 a month, although you can choose to pay that in full. It's about £159 for the year. Council tax is an interesting one because they're students. Full-time students are exempt from paying council tax, which is great for us as landlords if you're responsible for the bills. Piece of advice, if you do go down another route, say working professionals who are liable for council tax, you can pass that bill onto them and cover all the bills except council tax, which will just be the responsibility of the tenant at that point. But for this example, with 3 students who are all exempt, it's £0. Then we move on to the mortgage. Now remember, if you're buying property in a limited company, the mortgage interest is deductible. If you're buying property in your personal name, it's not deductible anymore. You actually get a mortgage interest relief of 20%. So that means that if you're a basic rate taxpayer in your personal name, Section 24, this new rule, won't affect you. If you're a high rate taxpayer, you're going to get screwed. So, as this property is owned in a limited company, it means that I can deduct the mortgage interest, and that is £264 a month. And the final cost is the insurance. Now, I've been speaking to one of my JPU students about this because we've both been complaining to each other about it. The insurance costs have gone up, and that's because the cost of materials shot up just after COVID, and the insurance companies are factoring in this increase in price. Now, it's not too bad because it's still only a 3-bed HMO, not like a 6-7 bed. So the insurance cost is still relatively low, coming in at £31 a month. This gives us a grand total for our monthly expenses of £1,000. And it is worth saying here that this £232 a month here for the management costs, when you're first starting out in property, you may want to take on that responsibility yourself if you've only got, say, 1, 2, 3 properties in your portfolio, because you can still manage them. It's when you start scaling much bigger and then you've got more inquiries from tenants coming in, which then becomes almost a full-time job. So if you are starting out, potentially this figure here is something that you could save if you're looking at these costs and looking on where to save. So now we're going to move on to summarising everything that we've been through in this lesson and finally getting to a pre-tax profit. So the gross monthly income is £1,755 per month. And we said that our monthly expenses were £1,000 a month, which is a nice and easy figure. Bringing our pre-tax profit, we'll put that in black, to £755 a month. And that's not a bad figure considering that I'd recycled all of my money out, plus an extra £16,000, and I'm now getting £755 a month pre-tax profit every month from this property. And the reason why I don't talk about after tax, although I will give you an example now, is because it's all on your individual circumstances, whether you're buying in your personal name, whether you're a limited company, and what other expenses you have. For example, that company might have done 10,000 business miles in the tax year. And for those 10,000 business miles, you can claim tax relief of 45 pence per mile, which is a tax saving of £4,500. So it's unfair for me now to say that the tax I'm left with is just the corporation tax, which is 19%, but then also you might have other expenses within that limited company, which reduces your tax even further, if that makes sense. So that's why I always like to leave this figure for then you to then take that and then calculate your own tax afterwards. But if these were the only expenses that I had in that limited company, just from that one property, for example, and just to give you an example of the tax, it would be corporation tax at 19%, because it's up to profits of £50,000, which would be £143 tax to pay, which would leave us with a net profit of £612. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It did take a little bit longer to film this because this little man has been underneath my feet this whole time, and every time I've been trying to do something, he keeps biting the whiteboard. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did like it, leave it with a like, comment down below, and please do subscribe to the channel because Cookie would really appreciate it.